Aurora Cafe in Mosgiel is your family-friendly cafe and caterers with traditional, unpretentious food cooked and presented the good old-fashioned way. Our extensive cabinet selection features delicious fresh home baking with sandwiches made daily and to order. Enjoy a light meal. Choose from our all-day breakfast menu or maybe a burger, guaranteed to challenge any appetite. Children's menu and a playground to entertain them while you enjoy a locally roasted coffee at the Aurora Cafe, Gordon Road, Mosgiel.
Kia ora, and welcome to the Rainbow Umbrella, the podcast where we talk about anything and everything under the rainbow. With me today is Anna Leask, senior journalist and crime and justice specialist for the New Zealand Herald, host of NZME's true crime podcast A Moment in Crime, and author of the books Christie, A Family's Tragic Loss and a Mother's Fight for Justice, and Behind Bars, which discusses life in New Zealand prisons. Welcome, Anna. It's so wonderful to kōrero with you today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's so exciting that you're here. So you've been a crime reporter and journalist for the New Zealand Herald for a number of years, and dealing with true crime has been a massive part of your life and career. What sparked your interest in true crime stories and reporting on these?
Wow. Look, I knew I wanted to be a journalist when I was 4 or 5, I think. My auntie was a journalist and I thought that looked cool, and I had a bit of a wee crush on Judy Bailey, and I would watch the news every night, and I loved pretending I was reading the paper, and my parents were big newspaper readers, so always knew I wanted to be a journalist, but sort of had these dreams of being a foreign correspondent and running around in a flak jacket in war-torn countries. And as I got a bit older and went through university, I was like, maybe not that. Maybe true crime is an interest. It has been an interest of mine in terms of my reading and, the books and things I've read over the years. And sort of got to my first job, and my boss there at the Christchurch Star said, "Hey, look, I need a police reporter, and you seem to have a bit of an interest in that. Would you like to have a crack?" And that's where that started. So, I always loved watching sort of crime documentaries and series with Dad. And I remember going to my grandparents and little things like sitting and watching The Bill, or Crime Watch or Blue Heelers. It was always my sort of, I leaned in further to that sort of content than anything else. So it surprised nobody that knew me when I started as a police and court reporter in my early career.
Yeah, wow. That's so cool that it's just one of those things that, you had an interest in, but it almost was like the universe presented this to you. It's like, this is where you need to be. This is what you need to be doing.
Yeah, I just felt like I never, people say, how do you know what you want to do when you grow up? And I just always knew, sort of fell into it. So it's never been something I've thought much about.
Yeah, I love that. So how difficult was it to establish yourself as a journalist in this field? Were there any barriers that you faced?
I was really lucky in my first job. My first editor, Barry Clark, had been quite a prominent police reporter for the press, Sunday Star Times and that sort of thing. So he had some really good contacts down here, and he knew the game. He knew how to get in with people. So I got a lot of advice from him. He's very, hands-on, teaching me about court and how to even spark conversations and relationships with police, and how to treat them, and, taking biscuits to the police station and just saying, "G'day, have you got anything happening in the community? Because while I want your big reads, I'm here to listen to everything, and I'm keen to know everything." And, when we had big cases, he was really good at guiding me through how to do things, responsibly, and how to do things compassionately, but also making sure I was getting the good angles and stuff. So it was really, really good having him there to sort of steer me in the early years. And I've just taken his advice, all through, I'm coming up 20 years as a reporter. So it's do things, speak to people how you'd want your family spoken to, be honest and open with them, and dealing with, police and authorities, just build that trust and don't burn them, which sounds really simple. And, it can be, just treat people with respect. And I think that if you do that, in particularly a crime and justice field, you get the respect back. If you do things openly, honestly, and authentically, there won't be many barriers. There are definitely, police that don't like me, don't want to talk to me. They can be a bit of an obstacle. Certainly reporting on certain court cases with, lawyers jumping in to get suppressions and that sort of thing is always tricky. But I think by and large, any barriers in what I do can be broken down just by building that trust and confidence. And I've put a lot of time and effort into that over the years.
Yeah, awesome. And I mean, that just highlights the fact that the people that you do your mahi with on a daily basis, they're just people too. They're dealing with the same sort of awful stories or barriers potentially
100%.
that you are. So,
yeah.
Interesting true crime has risen hugely over the last few years, as I'm sure you know. So do you have any thoughts on the increase in interest in true crime stories, particularly in the gendered stereotype that's been associated with love of true crime?
Yeah, it's interesting. There definitely, I think, with new media sort of coming out, podcasts weren't a thing when I started, and there's true crime documentaries, streaming services weren't there, so there wasn't a lot of access. You got your true crime back in the day from the newspaper, the 6 o'clock news, from Crime Watch, that sort of thing. It was quite limited. Now it's just you can find what you want anywhere, and I think people are naturally have a curiosity towards the crime space, and I think there's a lot of my friends who might be home on maternity leave or that sort of thing. There's a lot of my female friends that are sort of leaning more towards it, and I just think that there is a natural curiosity for it through everyone, and just with that sort of growth of content platforms, it's just it's insane how much people want. And I always get people saying, "Oh, can you do this case? Can you do this case? What's happening here?" And it's you sort of can't keep up with the demand almost.
Yeah, you touched on something really interesting there when you mentioned, your friends that might be on parental leave. There's obviously a gendered aspect to that as well. And I mean, we could probably spend all morning unpicking that, but I just thought that was a really, really interesting point, and one that a lot of people wouldn't consider when just being like, oh yeah, it's women and girls that like true crime,
Yeah, I think that's my experience is definitely it sort of leans more towards that sort of group of society. And I think that for my particular content, the way I, present victims and survivors and the sort of things I'm dealing with, I think maybe what I've heard from my, specific female friends and relatives is that, maybe their compassion and empathy is different from other listeners, and they sort of are drawn to true crime stuff because they just, I don't know, maybe it's that maternal, maybe it's that different way of caring about things and viewing things. And I'm not saying men don't care and have empathy, but I just think that in my experience, women are more drawn to it because it's just that difference in the way they feel things, really, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. So what are your thoughts on the commodification of true crime via things like podcasts? And, there's positives relating to this is, they get the victims and the survivors' stories out there often, as you do, in such a kind and compassionate way. But there's been, critique around the commodification of these stories, like merchandising through, podcasts, and, we're all guilty of it. But I just want to know what you think about that.
Yeah, and I mean, what I do every day is putting my name on stories and things that ultimately make money for my company and promote my company. But I think you've got to do it in a responsible and respectful way. I hate hearing podcasts that are really, or, documentaries that are done in a way that's really salacious and really pushing certain the yucky bits or the sexiest bits. And I just think if you're going to do true crime, whether it's an audio production or a story or video, you've got to try really hard to make it fair, accurate, and balanced. And I think when you're getting stories out, survivor stories and important stories that people can learn from, that's a really good thing. But I always cringe when, you get that the big money making and the documentaries that sort of skew one way or the other, and the podcasts that really, there's a few out there that I just can't listen to because it's just trivializing, I guess, what real people are going through. And I think if you're going to tell real stories, and particularly ones that are a bit the heartbreaking and deal with tragedy and really hard stuff. I think you've just got to present it in a way that's just a little bit more kind. I hate that people are trying to cash in on these stories for their own benefit. As I said, I work for a newspaper. My job is to sell papers and content, but there is a way to do it that's not sort of, I guess, vulture-ish.
And I mean, you could kind of pull on that thread with the Hollywoodization of true crime stories. You look at the Dharma series, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a horrific story, but the popularity of that is just insane. When the Ted Bundy film came out, which I myself have only just watched recently, that was this massive big thing. And I mean, we could go for ages about Ted Bundy, but it's the same sort of thing. It's like popularizing these people that are just monsters, really.
Yeah, and that's always a hard one because there is a natural fascination, inside the mind of killers and big criminals, and I think that there is a way to present that as well that's not glorifying them. You could do a story about the worst offender in the whole wide world and sort of give every part of their life and every tell every story about them, but not doing it in a way that makes them out to be some sort of hero. And I think that the Bundys and the Dharmas, I remember when Ivan Milat died in Australia, it was almost, it was almost that sort of hero status. And I just think that, yes, they're popular, but they don't have to be popular in a positive way, Definitely get inside their head and tell people what makes them tick and present those stories because they're so interesting, but without glorifying any part of their actions.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things I like so much about the Black Hands podcast. I don't know if you've listened to this, but the way the information was presented about the Bain murders, it was, this is one side, this is another side, and here's what I think. And it wasn't, sensationalizing anything. It was just telling the story and the facts that were available.
Yeah.
And I think it was really well done.
And that's, every time I sit down to write a script for A Moment in Crime, I think like that as well. Yes, I want to tell the survivor story or the victim story or their family story, but at the same time, I'm going to tell the full story of the offender, and that includes all parts of the trial, the for them, the against them, the things that were stacked against them to lead them to where they are. I think you've got to tell every part of a story, not just the juicy bits that'll make you popular.
Absolutely. So you mentioned in the author notes at the end of Christie that as a journalist you have to remain impartial and not form any attachments to a case and the people that you quoted her with. Something that is probably a lot easier said than done.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Christie's case was obviously one that stuck with you and the one that you felt a connection with. In other cases, how have you maintained that neutrality and your personal and professional boundaries?
Yeah, that's it. It's a hard one because you do become really close to the people that you work with in some occasions. Like, I consider Tracy and Brian Marceau personal friends now. But back when we were doing that reporting, the news reporting for the Herald, you've got to really stay on that fence in the middle. Otherwise, it's very clear in your writing which way you lean. And you've got to be kind and compassionate and warm and available to the people you're working with, but you've also got to have that boundary of there's no favoritism for either side. And, if a friendship or a deeper relationship emerges after a story, there's probably not a journalist out there that can't say that's happened to them. But I think it's really important for me at the time of writing, it's got to be professional and it's got to be, we're here to tell the story. Let's get the story out there first, make sure all of the bits are included. And for a lot of people, a lot of victims and survivors, that includes stuff that they don't want published. Back in the day, I was doing a little bit of work with Kylie Guy, for example, after her husband Scott was murdered, and she did not want her photo on the same page as the accused, who was obviously acquitted. And, I understood that deeply, but it's really hard to present a full, fair, accurate, and balanced story. You've got to have all of those elements present. So you just have to work with people to make sure everything is really sort of black and white, told properly, while sort of managing that deep compassion and empathy. And, you sit there and think, how the hell have you survived this? You poor people, what are you going through? But you really got to push that aside and make sure that everything's just so balanced and so fair.
For sure. And I mean, at the foundation of it, I guess, the relationship that you build with these people, it's like, okay, I can consider you a friend now, but, the motivation behind me doing this is to tell your story in a way that is, the facts as we have them sort of thing. It's,
Yeah.
yeah.
And some people I've worked with, you tell the story and you never hear from them again. They appreciate the story being done, but that's it for them. And they get the same absolute empathetic and compassionate treatment as everybody else. And just it's case by case, but I just think you've got to really put your personal feelings right to the back while you're presenting that as sort of journalism.
Yeah, for sure. So apart from Christie's, is there another case you've investigated or written upon that has stuck with you?
Oh gosh, look, there's
If
many
you can pick
over
one.
the years. Yeah. Oh, look, there's so many over the years that that do stick with you. Some of the beautiful people I met after the terror attack in Christchurch, that was a really hard one, not to let personal feelings and, perspectives on the offender get in the way. Some of them I sort of still speak to regularly. There's, other people on much smaller levels, a lot of women who have survived sexual violence, and I've written about their trials or their cases. We're still in contact, and they'll still reach out and we have a chat. And I'm really proud of that ability to connect with those people in a way that we get their story out there, well, for lack of a better word, happy with it. They've told a story in a way that they're comfortable, and it's out there and it's done, and then they still feel like there's a connection with me. And I think that it's really cool to have that and to be able to, it's a privilege. Every story I tell about someone who's been through something terrible is a privilege and an honor. And it sounds really, really cheesy, but they could say no. They could go to another journalist. So it's just as an example, at the weekend, one of the women I wrote about a few years back got married, and we're Facebook friends, and just to see what she went through with her abuser as a young person, and to see her get married, and she's got a child, and beautiful, beautiful wedding. And you just have that sense of pride of seeing how far these people have come. And it's really cool that, being able to see them not just survive the initial court stuff and what's happened to them and write about that, but, go on to really be empowered by what I've done with them and go on to live great lives. I'm not saying that's because of me, but being able to be a part of that rebuild is very, very cool.
I think that's beautiful. And I mean, you mentioned, connections and being Facebook friends with people that you've written about or worked with. So how do you maintain your own privacy and personal boundaries in that space? Because, people are going to know who you are.
Yeah, for sure. Well, firstly, on Facebook, I don't have my last name by choice.
Yeah.
I've got family with the same last name that, are out there, and I don't ever want them to be contacted. So my brother's a journalist as well. I don't think he's got his real name on Facebook.
Right.
But, a lot of, it's just the way the media works these days. A lot of people I have to reach out through Facebook too. There's no landline at the house, and you can't just drop off a letter. So that connection on Facebook is a big starting point in a lot of cases. And, from there, you'll get the request from them to be friends, maybe at the end of the story or a few months after, and that's always a choice. I think it's a pretty natural process. The ones that do want to make that connection after the story it's a pretty genuine, and it's pretty cool. And they're people that want to keep connecting, seeing what I'm doing and helping other people and working with other people. And but yeah, there's certainly, I'm pretty, I guess, firm that if you cross the line and for both of us, I think that connection would be ended. And it's not happened that often. I think most people, it's a really genuine, the people that I write about are really, really genuine and really, really great. And it's always, when you get that sort of request or, follow up, they might text you Merry Christmas or something. And it's really cool that you've been able to make that connection and have that trust with them and make a difference in their life so that they think about you in future.
That's lovely.
And then, of course, on the other side, there's people that absolutely hate me, can't stand me, wish I'd never contacted them, and I fully appreciate that as well. So, it can go either way.
Yeah. So do you find that social media is actually, quite a useful tool for you as much as it can be potentially a negative thing in some spaces.
Yeah, very much. It's just the way the world has kind of developed is that most of our contact is online now. And I think that, when I started as a journalist, there was a lot of cold calls, there was a lot of door knocks, and that certainly still does happen. But it's just what I've found with specifically what I do and the people I'm reaching out to, it's just a bit of a gentler approach. It's a softer intro, being able to say, hi, my name's Anna, I'm a journalist at Herald. I'm working on a story about such and such, and I'd really like to have a chat. And some of these go to the spam inbox, or they're filtered out and you never hear from them again. And others come back and say, hey, yeah, let's chat, or bugger off. But I think that it's where there is a successful connection, I think that people do appreciate that approach more than, you turning up at their house or ringing them. Well, that might be in the middle of their workday and you're ringing their cell phone. So, and we will do everything we can to make sure we connect with a person and give them a chance to tell their story. But social media is definitely, I find, a gentler and more welcomed approach these days.
Exactly, because it's more easy to ignore a Facebook message if you don't feel comfortable or have no interest in connecting, right? It doesn't feel as rude as, shutting the door on someone's face or hanging up a phone on them, for extreme examples.
Yeah, and a lot of the times, you'll see people have read the message and they'll take a couple of days and come back to you and say, hey, thank you for that. I've had a think about it, and, this is what I've decided. And you kind of can't have that on the phone or, someone's front door. It's, as I said, it's a bit of a softer launch of me into their lives. And by and large, I think people do appreciate it. Again, some people are devastated to have that contact. They don't want it. Some get very, very angry, and that's also fine. I respect any response to any request that I get.
Yeah, because you never know which way it's going to go, right? You take the punt and just see what comes out the other side, right?
Yeah, and I'm a firm believer that, every person that you want to write about or that something's happened, they might want to tell their story, and you've got to start from that point. They've got a right to a voice. You've got to give them one. And if they choose not to engage, that's absolutely fine. But it would be absolutely irresponsible and remiss of, me as a journalist not to reach out to them and at least let them know I'm looking at something and I'm going to be publishing something, and this is your story. Would you like to tell it in your own words? A lot of people will come back and say, hey, look, thank you very much for reaching out. I don't want to talk, but thank you for letting me know. And you never know what response you're going to get, but you've got to ask the question.
Absolutely. So you've covered a lot of tragic and awful stories over your career, but you've done so with fairness as well as kindness and compassion for the people they involve. But how about you? How do you look after yourself when you're constantly surrounded by some of the most horrible things people have experienced?
Yeah, it's you definitely absorb a lot of other people's darkness, and it's very easy to go home and open a bottle of wine and numb that out. It's very easy to not look after yourself and think that that's helping you get through it. I think that for me, my first editor gave me some really good advice. He said it's, for example, when you ring someone who's experienced a loss, don't open with, I'm sorry for your loss. You're not sorry. You don't know the person. You don't know the circumstances. By the end of working with them, you can be sorry and sympathetic. But, it's not your story. It's not your loss. And that might sound really, really cold, but that's how I approach everything. I'm giving you all of the chance to use your voice and have a voice, but it's not my story. I'm just here to tell it. And I have been able to mostly switch off and leave work at work, because that's just the way I go into it. Is I'm just the mouthpiece. I'm just the storyteller. But there are definitely cases that get to you, definitely cases that you get home at night and you just think, God, that's yuck. I feel yuck. And it's finding what works for you. Like, I read a lot. I, get into go home and read a book or I watch a lot of trash TV. My partner and family give me so much stick about it. Kardashians, Real Housewives, anything mindless. I'm a huge Coronation Street fan.
Amazing.
And it's just getting home and switching that on and having a bit of a binge watch about normal stuff, mindless stuff. I don't have to think about it. It's not sad. It's not dark. And after an hour or so of that and a cup of tea or whatever, it's just like, okay, a bit of a reset. So yeah, it sounds so nerdy, and in my earlier days, as I said, it was, and I think a lot of journalists are the same, it's go to the pub, thrash it out with your colleagues and then soldier on. But for me, that never worked. And so it's just that reset, I guess, is the important thing for me. And it's, mindless trash gets me through a lot of stuff.
Yeah, there we go. Trash is good for you.
Yeah. In some circumstances, it's healing.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned, having a korero with your colleagues. Like, is that still something that you would do? Because I feel like that would be quite beneficial. Obviously not in every circumstance, but, you've got people that are at the coalface with you. They kind of understand what it is you're dealing with and going through.
Yeah, I'm really, really lucky. I've got some people I'm really close to in my newsroom that I've had since the get-go that know me, know how I operate, and know what the trauma reporting space is like. I'm really, people like Caroline Mingyi and Jane Fair who have been doing what I do for years and years and years longer than me are always there to take a phone call. I've got other colleagues that have had the shit thrown at them like I do, and they get it. And we're really lucky in our team at the Herald that there is sort of a core group of us that have been there for donkey's years. We know each other well. We're not scared to pick up the phone. We're not scared to say, I've had the worst day and this is why. And, we all bolster each other and we all get what we're going through. I remember after the terror attack, so we were offered counselling and that was great. And I just said, absolutely no thanks. I don't want to talk about that to anyone that doesn't get what we're doing on the ground. And, some of my colleagues did take up the counselling and said it was really helpful. Some didn't enjoy it but I just think for me, it's, connecting with people that have been there and done it and know how it feels is huge for me. Just being able to bounce feelings and ideas off them that they completely understand.
You've touched on a really important point there, knowing what works for you, knowing what you need to look after yourself and to support yourself and, reset, as you said, is really important.
Yeah, and I've got, colleagues at both my company and in the industry who absolutely thrive on going to that workplace counselling and getting it out and talking it through. I've got other workmates that box and run and, get out in the pouring rain after a long day at court for a big walk. So everyone's got their way of dealing with it. And I think as long as you've got our way of dealing with it, that's the most important thing. It's not just shutting off and ignoring it and, which we've all done in the past. There's definitely been times where you just box it away and eventually the box breaks and there is an absolute tantrum or meltdown or, but I think by and large, you find out what works for you and just do it.
So, I mean, like in all jobs, there must be days where you just don't want to do the mahi. How do you get through this and keep on going?
Yeah, there's definitely days where you just think, I do not want to sit in this trial. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to pick up the phone and hear about another person that has been sexually assaulted or, abused as a child. I just, it's too hard. But at the end of the day, it's about telling stories that are really important. And most of them are hard to hear and horrible to hear. And I just sort of, you take a breath and you look back and I look at the people whose stories have helped other people. And that's what keeps me going. Every story I write about someone that survived something terrible, you will get at least one email from someone else saying, hey, look, that really helped me. Or can I reach out to that person? Or I didn't know that was an option. Or can you point me in this direction? And just feeling like people are reading what I'm putting out there and it might be helping in even the tiniest way. That's what sort of keeps you going and drives you to put your boots on and get back into it.
That kaupapa and that ethos really comes through in your writing and presenting the stories. So it's really nice to hear that is how you do it. So what is the hardest part of your job?
Jeepers. I think at the very core, it's seeing people in pain that shouldn't be.
Mm,
Um, seeing people that have been hurt and abused, seeing people that have lost their children, their partners, and it's preventable, or you know, child abuse and domestic violence are not things that we should be seeing at this level in 2024 in New Zealand. And I just,
mm,
it breaks a little bit more of your heart every time you have to sit down with someone and hear about the terrible things that have happened to them. That's balanced out with being able to tell their stories in a way that is empathetic and that helps empower them. But it's just, yeah, that's definitely the worst part, is seeing the pain that people go through and the things that they have to endure,
mm,
and just thinking, God, that just should never have happened.
mm. Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like that reading and listening to it as well. You're like, why is this even a thing that is being
Yeah.
presented? But yeah.
And I think when it's for me, it's the child abuse stuff that
Mm,
is the hardest of all. How many stories do we have to tell
mm,
about these little people that are just having terrible things done to them, and having their lives taken, and it's just unfathomable that it is still happening. And that
mm,
for me is just it's infuriating. It's
mm,
one of the hardest things to sort of accept and get my head around in what I do.
mm. Yeah, I mean, I can't even comprehend dealing with that, as regularly as you do. So, yeah, well done for sitting in that space and, getting these people's stories out there and advocating for the people they involve.
Yeah, and that's absolutely what it's about. And
Mm,
that's what a moment in crime, it is about the old cases and the cold cases and the big cases. But at the heart of every case, every story I write, effectively someone's been harmed or hurt or damaged.
mm,
And I don't take that lightly. That's always at the forefront of my mind, that I wouldn't have a job if terrible things weren't happening to people.
mm,
And I think that's a huge responsibility, to make sure that you don't hurt or damage these people even more. And that's my starting point of every story I write. And it just sounds so cheesy when you say it out loud, but it's how would I want to be approached? How would I want my mum to be looked after? How would I want my brother or my nieces or my partner to be treated
mm,
if something happened to them? And that's how I go into every interview, every phone call, every approach to a story.
mm, mm. That's beautiful. So, what about the most rewarding thing about your job?
The most rewarding thing is when you tell someone's story and it helps them,
Mm,
and they're able to say, hey, look, I felt horrible about this. I was so worried, and now I just feel a relief. It's out there. And,
mm,
that's always amazing that you've been able to be a part of that. It's rewarding to create awareness and educate people around things that are happening in their own community that they might not know about. And I just think telling those stories that are hard
mm,
but are so important, and being able to connect with people. I always say that I meet people in the worst circumstances, but they're some of the best people I've met in my life. And
mm,
it's truly is an honor and a privilege to be in that position every day. And I wouldn't say I enjoy it, but it's a hugely rewarding and satisfying process to go through with people that have just had things happen to them that I can't begin to imagine and hope would never happen to me.
mm, mm. And finally, what piece of advice or information would you give to any budding crime journalists out there?
Oh, I guess two things is just be yourself. The people that you're going to be dealing with can see through. They've had things happen to them, and they want to be able to trust you. They want an authentic person working with them. So go in there and be yourself and work with them, work for them,
Mm,
and just that, be fair and be kind. And also, I guess it's going to be hard, and don't have the blinkers on and think it's all glamorous and courtrooms and
mm,
CSI, and it's hard slog, and it's horrible sometimes, and you hear things and you see things, and it's sickening at times. But the difference you can make in telling these stories and getting issues raised is hugely important and rewarding. So if you really want to do it, stick with it. And yeah, just tell the stories that are important.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Anna. It has been amazing to speak with you. Thank you for being so open and honest and taking the time to have a chat.
Thank you for having me. It's been lovely speaking to you.
The Rainbow Umbrella is kindly sponsored by the Aurora Cafe in Mosgiel. The Rainbow Umbrella theme song is by Paul S. Allen and Beth. Check them out on Spotify. New episodes of The Rainbow Umbrella are available every fourth Thursday on Otago Access Radio 105.4 FM, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. Do you have an idea for an episode or something you would like to kōrero about? Get in touch at rainbowumbrellapod@gmail.com.